Sorry I haven't posted in a couple of days. I've been trying to change my sleep schedule, so I've been trying to go to bed earlier, and I haven't had time to read. So, we're on chapter 3. I'm probably not going to get the whole thing read in one day, in one night, because I'm sleepy. Oh, but it looks like a short chapter, so maybe I will. Okay, it's a short chapter. Okay, chapter 3 is persons of mean and vile condition. I told you guys to put in the comments if I mess words up to give me the proper pronunciation. And I have not read the comments not one time. So, hopefully I've been pronouncing everything right. I'm doing my very best. Okay, chapter 3, persons of mean and vile condition. In 1676, 70 years after Virginia was founded, 100 years before it supplied leadership for the American Revolution, that colony faced a rebellion of white frontiersmen joined by slaves and servants. A rebellion so threatening that the government had to flee the burning capital of Jamestown, and England decided to send 1,000 soldiers across the Atlantic, hoping to maintain order among 40,000 colonists. This was Bacon's rebellion. After the uprising was suppressed, its leader, Nathaniel Bacon, dead and his associates hanged, Bacon was described in a Royal Commission report. When I do this means it's in quotations. This means that this is someone else's personal account. He was said to be about 4 or 5 and 30 years of age, indifferent, tall but slender, black hair, and an ominous, pensive, melancholy aspect of pestilent and prevalent logical discourse tending to atheism. He seduced the vulgar and most ignorant people to believe so that their whole hearts and hopes were set now upon Bacon. Next, he charges the governor as negligent and wicked, treacherous and incapable, the laws and taxes as unjust and oppressive, and cries up absolute necessity of redress. Thus Bacon encouraged the tumult, and as the unquiet crowd follow and adhere to him, he listeth them as they came in upon a large paper, writing their names circular wise, that their ringleaders might not be found out. Having cornered them into his circle, giving them brandy to wind up the charm, and enjoining them by an oath to stick fast together and to him, and the oath being administered, he went and infected New Kent County ripe for rebellion. That was dramatic. Out of quotations. Bacon's rebellion began with conflict over how to deal with the Indians, who were close by on the western frontier, constantly threatening. Whites, who had been ignored when huge land grants around Jamestown were given away, had gone west to find land, and there they encountered Indians. Were those frontier Virginians resentful that the politicos and landed aristocrats who controlled the colony's government in Jamestown first pushed them westward into Indian territory, and then seemed indecisive in fighting the Indians? That might explain the character of their rebellion, not easily classifiable as either anti-aristocrat or anti-Indian because it was both. And the governor, William Berkeley, and his Jamestown crowd, were they more conciliatory to the Indians? They wooed certain of them as spies and allies. Now that they had monopolized the land in the east, could use frontier whites as a buffer and needed peace. The desperation of the government in suppressing the rebellion seemed to have a double motive. developing an Indian policy which would divide Indians in order to control them. In New England at this very time, Massasoit's son, Metacom, was threatening to unite Indian tribes and had done frightening damage to Puritan settlements in King Philip's War, and teaching the poor whites of Virginia that rebellion did not pay, by a show of superior force, by calling for troops from England itself, by mass hanging. Violence had escalated on the frontier before the rebellion. Some dogged Indians took a few hogs to redress a debt, and whites, retrieving the hogs, murdered 2 Indians. The dogs then sent out a war party to kill a white herdsman, after which a white militia company killed 24 Indians. This led to a series of Indian raids, which the Indians outnumbered, turned into guerrilla warfare. The House of Burgesses in Jamestown declared war on the Indians, but proposed to exempt those Indians who cooperated. This seemed to anger the frontiers people, who wanted total war, but also resented the high taxes assessed to pay for the war. Times were hard in 1676. There was genuine distress, genuine poverty. All contemporary sources speak of the great mass of people as living in severe economic straits, writes Whitcomb Washburn, who, using British colonial records, has done an exhaustive study of Bacon's rebellion. It was a dry summer, ruining the corn crop, which was needed for food, and the tobacco crop needed for export. Governor Berkeley, in his 70s, tired of holding office, wrote wearily about his situation. How miserable that man is that governs a people where 6 parts of 7 at least are poor, indebted, discontented, and armed. His phrase, 6 parts of 7, suggests the existence of an upper class not so impoverished. In fact, there was such a class already developed in Virginia. Bacon himself came from this class, had a good bit of land, and was probably more enthusiastic about killing Indians than about redressing the grievances of the poor. But he became a symbol of mass resentment against the Virginia establishment and was elected in the spring of 1676 to the House of Burgesses, when he insisted on organizing armed detachments to fight the Indians outside official control. Berkeley proclaimed him a rebel and had him captured, whereupon 2,000 Virginians marched into Jamestown to support him. Berkeley let Bacon go in return for an apology, but Bacon went off, gathered his militia, and began raiding the Indians. Bacon's Declaration of the People of July 1676 shows a mixture of populist resentment against the rich and frontier hatred of the Indians. It indicted indicted the Berkeley administration for unjust taxes, for putting favorites in high positions, for monopolizing the beaver trade, and for not protecting the western farmers from the Indians. Then Bacon went out to attack the friendly Pamunkey Indians, killing 8, taking others prisoners, plundering their possessions. There is evidence that the rank and file of both Bacon's rebel armies and Berkeley's official army were not as enthusiastic as their leaders. There were mass desertions on both sides, according to Washburn. In the fall, Bacon, aged 29, fell sick and died. Fell sick and died because of, as a contemporary put it, swarms of vermin that bred in his body. A minister, apparently not a sympathizer, wrote this epitaph: Bacon is dead, and I am sorry at my heart that Lyson Flux should take the hangman's part. The rebellion didn't last long after that. A ship armed with 30 guns cruising the York River became the base for securing order, and its captain, Thomas Grantham, used force and deception to disarm the last rebel forces. Coming upon the chief garrison of the rebellion, he found 400 armed Englishmen and Negroes, a mixture of free men, servants, and slaves. He promised to pardon everyone, to give freedom to slaves and servants, whereupon they surrendered their arms and dispersed, except for 80 Negroes and 20 English who insisted on keeping their arms. Grantham promised to take them to a garrison down the river, but when they got into the boat, he trained his big guns on them, disarmed them, and eventually delivered the slaves and servants to their masters. The remaining garrisons were overcome one by one. 23 rebel leaders were hanged. It was a complex chain of oppression in Virginia. The Indians were plundered by white frontiersmen who were taxed and controlled by the Jamestown elite, and the whole colony was being exploited by England, which brought the colonists tobacco at prices it dictated and made 100,000 pounds a year for the king. Berkeley himself, returning to England years earlier to protest the English Navigation Acts, which gave English merchants a monopoly of the colonial trade, had said, "We cannot but resent that 40,000 people should be impoverished to enrich little more than 40. Merchants who, being the only buyers of our tobacco, give us what they please for it, and after it is here, sell it how they please, and indeed have 40,000 servants in us at cheaper rates than in any other man have slaves. Than any other men have slaves." From the testimony of the governor himself, the rebellion against him had the overwhelming support of the Virginia population. A member of his council reported that the defection was almost general, and laid it to the lewd dispositions of some persons of desperate fortunes, who had the vain hopes of taking the country whole out of his majesty's hand into their own. Another member of the governor's council, Richard Lee, noted that Bacon's rebellion had started over Indian policy, but the zealous inclination of the multitude to support Bacon was due to hopes of leveling. Leveling meant equalizing the wealth. Leveling was to be behind countless actions of poor whites against the rich in all of the English colonies in the centuries and a half before the Revolution. The servants who joined Bacon's rebellion were part of a large underclass of miserably poor whites who came to the North American colonies from Europe's cities, whose governments were anxious to be rid of them. In England, the development of commerce and capitalism in the 15 and 1600s, the enclosing of land for the production of wool filled the cities with vibrant poor, and from the reign of Elizabeth on, laws were passed to punish them, imprison them in workhouses, or exile them. The Elizabethan definition of rogues and vagabonds included all persons calling themselves scholars, going about begging, all seafaring men, pretending losses of their ships or goods on the sea, going about the country begging, all idle persons going about in any country, either begging or using any subtle craft or unlawful games, common players of interludes and minstrels wandering abroad, all wandering persons, and common laborers being persons able in body, using loitering and refusing to work for such reasonable wages as is taxed or commonly given. My last page. Such persons found begging could be stripped to the waist and whipped bloody, could be sent out to the city, sent to work horses, or transported out of the country. In the 16 and 1700s, by forced exile, by lures, promises, and lies, by kidnapping, by the urgent need to escape the living conditions of the home country. Poor people wanting to go to America became commodities of profit for merchants, trades, ship captains, and eventually their masters in America. Abbott Smith, in his study of indentured servitude, colonists in bondage writes, from the complex pattern of forces, production, immigration, from the complex pattern of forces producing immigration to the American colonies, one stands out clearly as most powerful in causing the movement of servants. This was the pecuniary profit to be made by shipping them. After signing the indenture in which the immigrants agreed to pay their cost of passage by working for a master for 5 or 7 years, they were often imprisoned until the ship sailed to make sure they did not run away. In the year 1619, the Virginia House of Burgesses, born that year as the first representative assembly in America, it was also the year of the first importation of black slaves, provided for the recording and enforcing of contracts between servants and masters. As in any contract between unequal powers, and the parties appeared on paper as equals, but enforcement was far easier for master than for servant. The voyage to America lasted 8, 10, or 12 weeks, and the servants were packed into ships with the same fanatic concern for profits that marked the slave ships. If the weather was bad and the trip took too long, they ran out of food. The sloop Seaflower, leaving Belfast in 1741, was at sea 16 weeks when it arrived in Boston. 46 of its 106 passengers were dead of starvation, 6 of them eaten by the survivors. On another trip, 32 children died of hunger and disease and were thrown into the ocean. Gottlieb Mittelberger, a musician traveling from Germany to America around 1750, wrote about his voyage. During the journey, the ship is full of pitiful signs of distress: smells, fumes, horrors, vomiting, various kinds of seasickness, fever, dysentery, headaches, heat, constipation, boils, scurvy, cancer, mouth rot, and similar afflictions. All of them caused by the age and the high salted state of the food, especially of the meat, as well as by the very bad and filthy water. Add to all that shortage of food, hunger, thirst, frost, heat, dampness, fear, misery, vexation, and lamentation, as well as other troubles on board our ship on a day on which we had great storms. A woman about to give birth and unable to deliver under the circumstances, was pushed through one of the portholes inside into the sea. That's it. I'm falling asleep. I'm sleepy. I'll finish that chapter tomorrow.